Hello, everyone. My name is Iris, and thank you so much for joining us today for a webinar, Why Business Executives Need SLOs. We're super excited to explore this important topic with you all. And as we go along, please feel free to use the Q&A function or even the chat function to add questions. And to submit your questions, we will address them all at the end. This session is being recorded, so you can share it later with your colleagues who couldn't attend. And for now, without any further ado, I'll hand it over to Brian Singer to kick things off. So over to you, Brian.
Thanks, Urza. So hello, everyone. I'm Brian Singer. I'm the Chief Product Officer and co-founder at Nobl9. And I'm joined here today by, I would say, two industry luminaries. First, we have Alex Baldini. Alex is a senior engineering manager at Procore. Alex has a wealth of experience with systems and in the DevOps space, managing software engineering teams, and a significant amount of experience in managing reliability and rolling out service level objectives, which an initiative that he led at Procore. Let you tell everyone a little bit about Procore, Alex, in a minute. Dan Sepich here with us is a sales engineer at Nobl9. Dan works with Nobl9's customers to scale out service level objectives, build a culture of reliability. Before joining Nobl9, Dan was a director of SRE at Principal Financial Group, where he was responsible for bringing SLOs as a general practice into Principal. So both Dan and Alex have a wealth of experience working with executives, driving the value of service level objectives for reliability teams. And I'm really excited to have them both here with us today. I'm going to start with Alex. Alex, maybe could you tell us or tell the audience a little bit about Procore and what you guys do over there?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brian. So Procore is a construction SaaS platform. The mission statement at Procore is to connect everyone in construction on a global platform so we could build better, and generally to improve the lives of everyone in construction. And that's a pretty tall order, and that requires reliability. It requires establishing trust and earning trust with our customers and focusing on the customer experience so we can do those things in our mission statement. So yeah, we focus on large contract companies, but we also have, it's a very modular product. So we have a lot of different service stacks, and we were built on a large Ruby on Rails monolith. And as everybody does, we're learning how to break up that monolith and how to continue to provide a customer experience while we're growing as a company and adhering to our mission statement.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for that. So I'm gonna start with you a little bit here. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about how the discussion around service level objectives started in your organization, and really maybe what pain it was addressing?
Yeah, so when I first got to Procore, there was not an established observability team. So one of the first things that leadership did is they established an observability focused team. And when I got there, we already had a principal engineer that had been at Procore for a while. And so I sat with that principal engineer and we drew out a 3-year plan. And we looked at some of the intimate pain that our developers were feeling internally, and also some of the pain that maybe our customers were feeling. And so in that vision of 3 years, we recognized that, pager pain, that alert fatigue were things that we were experiencing from the IC side. And on the customer side, we had performance challenges. We had areas that were not visible to us, or the right actions were not being taken with that classic push and pull between features and tech debt. And so 3 or 4 years ago, we laid out a plan to bring service level objectives into Procore from the ground up. This was not a technology that was embraced when we started bringing this in. So I think our mission was pretty clear for us. It was reduce pager fatigue, help teams make that decision between feature work and tech debt. And, when you start looking at the solution that provides that answer, it's service level objectives. At least on paper it was, right? We read the books, we saw all the stuff, and then we embarked on that journey. We trusted in the literature that we read and the anecdotes that we saw, and we embraced the service level objective path. And here we are, for the better for it, actually.
And I think you Procore especially has done an excellent job building that culture of reliability in, from what I've seen from the outside. Dan, maybe from your experience both at Principal and as a sales engineer at Nobl9, working with a bunch of different organizations, how have you seen that SLO discussion get started, specifically raising to the level of this is a capability that we need to invest in?
Yeah, I mean, I had a similar experience to Alex, it sounds like. But really, I kind of found myself, so I kind of grew up in an ops world, right? Supporting a lot of application hosting infrastructure. And we always kind of had a hard time normalizing the reliability conversation, like the definition of reliability and the platforms we use to drive that conversation. There was no consistency in it. And we didn't have good ways of articulating how much failure we could tolerate and measuring that in a meaningful manner. Like we were supporting, certain infrastructure that was taking very, very high volumes. And we had APMs telling us that there were things wrong, but we could never really articulate the customer experience because we weren't really setting intentional targets, for our dependency owners and things that connected up to the business that meant something to our customers. So without kind of a framework to drive those conversations and the tooling and the culture to normalize that conversation, let's say, you're kind of just chasing things all the time. There's really no foundation of, this is why we're doing what we're doing. This is why we're prioritizing this work. This is why we're doubling the capacity of this environment, because we had this massive blip that really hurt at that one moment. It's a kind of a reactive approach. So like Alex, from my perspective, it was, really studying the literature, trying to understand, industry, where things were going. And the SLO framework is such a simple concept to understand and grasp, that people and like execs and leaders and engineers can all connect to. And it really helps kind of facilitate reliability conversations. And then it's kind of the same story that we see with, the customers that we have, right? There's just a really common theme along what I just said. So hope that gives some good insights there.
That's great. So I want to get into, sort of the topic at hand, specifically around service level objectives and sort of the executive lens on that. And Alex, I think many of us have sat there. We understand that there's a capability that's going to deliver a lot of value for the company, but you've got to go present that to leadership and get their buy-in. And the first question that I'm going to have as an executive is, well, what's in it for me? So when you go evangelize SLOs and you speak to an executive audience, what's in it for them?
Yeah. When Dan gave his answer, by the way, all I could do was nod, because the first step really is defining what's acceptable. And a lot of that requires, from my experience, at least some top-down buy-in, right? If everyone says that 250 milliseconds is your expected performance, then that has to trickle from the top down. But going into a sort of an executive mindset, one of the things I've learned in my career is that executives like to focus on signals. That if you can present to them a signal on where they should or should not pay attention, that is an easy thing for them to look at. Red, yellow, or green. And oftentimes the complexity of those signals, they leave to those beneath them, like they leave to directors or ICs. But if I'm a VP or senior VP, I just want to know, am I healthy? Is things working in the right way? And so that's what's in it for them, is being able to go to a place that you have, that has been invested in and iterated on and constantly improved, and allow that to drive a discussion. And we at Procore try to have a non-blameless culture. It's not, if something is red, we're not into the blame, but we want to learn and understand. And what I like, something Dan said is very true for me. SLOs are very simple. When done right, they can be a green, yellow, or a red signal, but they're very complex underneath. And to avoid some of that complex conversation is a little bit unfair. I think if I were asking a executive to invest in SLOs, it would be to understand some of the underlying signals that make up your green, yellow, or red signal. But if you want a place to tell you whether or not you should be worried about customer experience, if you want a place to give a true signal on how your customers are perceiving a particular product, when you get your SLOs right, over many iterations and over lots of discussions and lots of true engineering, then you do have a single source that you can trust, that you can go and rely on. And if I wanted the one place to click and go look and feel good at night when I was wrapping up my day, it's a healthy green SLO that's burning down at 1x. I know it's been well thought out, and I still have error budget left. That's the sort of vernacular that I would want to use when I'm checking out whether I'm healthy or meeting my customers' expectations. And so my ask of, when I go and present to executives, it is sort of laying out that you can make this as easy or as hard as you want. We can get it to green, yellow, or red, or you can dive into the SLIs and the math that we're using to generate these SLOs. And as all things tech, the deeper you get, like maybe the more confident you get, or the more trust you have in your organization, then you can still instill that confidence as that signal is rolled up. But in my career, I haven't found so far a better signal when done right of whether or not I should be worried how my customers perceive my product.
That's a great answer. Thanks for that. And sort of along those lines, maybe Dan and then Alex, if you want to jump in too. I think we all think about service level objectives and using error budgets and burn rate alerting as concepts that really help us improve operations and operate more efficiently, do more with less cost. How should executives think about quantifying that improvement when they think about the ROI of an SLO program? Because if you think about it, with SLOs, we're asking engineers to take time away from their day to go, build these signals and to look at them and to review them. So maybe, really what is the impact on productivity and ultimately, the bottom line for the business?
Yeah, now that I've been immersed in this world for a few years now, what I see is a lot of organizations are trying to build decision-making from incident data. And incident data tends to be fairly subjective. And there's challenges with doing that at scale and telling a story at scale around what the reliability posture is of an organization. So like, for example, hey, we want our organization to be 99.9% available, meaning we tolerate a certain amount of, downtime, and then you get focused on MTTR and things like that. But you're not using observability data to drive those decisions. And if you start using observability data, which you pay a lot of money for, and you give engineers the space to actually think about what does reliability mean to my users that consume my service, let's have intentional conversations about what those targets are, because not every single service is going to be 99.9. You start developing a framework to tell stories about how reliable your entire organization is, in the context of that service. That's one thing that I think a lot of execs get a lot of wins from, when they get that story laid out for them in a few numbers, rolled up, versus like, here we had all these incidents. Okay, are we reacting to them? How do I know that we should prioritize, these dependencies over these dependencies? It gets challenging. So I think giving your engineering organization space to put thought into high quality SLIs, that's where the complexity comes from that Alex is talking about. Everybody starts understanding the systems much better. And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. But once you get to a place of adoption and confidence in some of the observability data, it can be a game changer compared to not making decisions based off the data. So that's my attempt at a quick answer on that topic.
No, there is a lot of complexity there that to unpack, and so Alex, from where you sit, having gone through that deployment, how have SLOs sort of tangibly improved operations, in a way that you can sort of quantify for an executive who's thinking about where they're going to invest their time and effort?
I will try to keep that answer brief because I can paint a very long picture. So let me start with the first thing is it did what Dan called out is it started the right conversations. What operationally is acceptable at Procore? What is an acceptable measurement of availability? Because when you start trying to build SLOs and you see some teams at 200 milliseconds for their thresholds and others at 1000 milliseconds, there's a disparity there. And so why are some getting a healthy signal and others? So the first thing it does is it starts that conversation of what does operational acceptance even look like at a company. And the other value and it grows from there. Like once you start having that operational conversation of what is acceptable, what is measurable, you start diving more and more into the process of how you build those SLOs. And again, like I could rant for hours on all of the advantages that we've seen from that, but it started with getting unified in an observable signal, what is acceptable, and then once that signal is generated and you have a healthy signal, where else is it showing up that you can reiterate and improve that signal? So another way that we check this is first to know. When we have an incident, were we the first to know with our observability? And if not, then that means we have some work to do on some SLOs to improve those so that we become first to know. And there just are many, many more lessons that we've learned along the way. And yeah, like I said, I can keep answering for an hour, but I'll stop and let other questions sort of generate those answers.
Yeah, I think we'll get into some of those topics in more detail too. We did get one question that came in that's relevant to this topic so far. And I'll open it up to either of you. But which financial metrics do you think are most relevant for demonstrating the return on investment of these types of initiatives?
I saw that question and I was trying to think of the answer as it came in. I actually run the internal cloud cost team at Procore as well. So we are very tied to when does our spend go up and for what reasons. And I think right now the only correlation I can make is, obviously I can't put a price on customer trust, right? Like customer trust is sacred. And I know this is sort of a dodging the answer, but it's very easy to lose that trust. And if you don't have a reliable signal that customers are experiencing a bad situation, then like churn can be a part of your reliability and your cost. Losing a customer is certainly a financial metric. And did you lose them because of reliability? What we have also found as we've matured in this space, and this isn't a topic that's specific to SLOs, but once you start having those operational discussions of what is an acceptable service performance, right, at some millisecond, the next thing that starts to evolve is how efficient is the cost that you're using to maintain that kind of reliability. So for example, we have found often that we're overscaled, that we're meeting our reliability thresholds, but we're overscaled to meet those reliability thresholds. So now we can start to dial in and dial down, which affects compute across all of our platform and starts to drive financial metrics. So it's a great question. And what I would encourage is that you have some way of evaluating the total compute at your company and how those are broken up by various products, and then how those costs relate to other availability and reliability metrics. And then you can start comparing like and like services. If one service only needs a certain size of cluster and they're able to meet their performance and they have a similar footprint, then you can start doing comparative analysis on cost. Eventually, and what I would love Procore to start maturing to as well, is cost by design, where you're actually thinking about how much your service is going to cost. But it has nothing to do with SLOs, but it is just part of that maturity, that organizational maturity. As you get more reliable, you start having more discussions around cost. Joel, I hope that answers your question. I feel like I'm dodging that one a little bit, but it's about the best answer I can come up with.
Well, and I think, you're getting to an important point there, which goes to the topic of the webinar, like why executives should care about SLOs. There is this implicit tie between the reliability of a service and the cost it's going to take to operate that service.
Right.
And maybe Dan, you can add some thoughts there around how SLOs help you sort of optimize when you're talking about service delivery, making sure you're not overspending on things like infrastructure.
You know, what I've kind of come to realize, just the framework and the concept of an error budget implicitly, right? It's SLO targets across your organization really are going to represent how much failure that you can tolerate. And at the end of the day, it's to mitigate risk. And when you look at the bottom line, that's like, what's the impacts to revenue, right? So if you're having intentional conversations around how much risk you can tolerate in any sense, whether it's infrastructure or measuring, key customer experiences that are really close to the business, that are more user facing, it all connects together. But inherently in the SLO conversation of, hey, let's tolerate this much failure, you're essentially saying, how much risk can we take at losing revenue for most companies? So that's kind of what I see. So just by doing SLOs at scale, you're kind of building in risk tolerances to all the different little services that make up the larger experience that your organization is providing. It's just kind of baked in. And that's been kind of interesting. Like 2 years ago, I was at SRECon, and one of I think the opening keynote was the success in SRE is silent, right? Like, because it's kind of hard sometimes to articulate ROI when there aren't incidents. When there are incidents, it's really easy to say, hey, that just cost us 500 grand. Great. But we do work with customers that they are able to articulate, hey, if we experience this much downtime, it means this much, loss in revenue. Not all organizations can articulate that as nicely as others. So, e-commerce versus like a financial services platform, it might be a little more nuanced as, organization to organization. But I think it's important just to remember, like, by doing SLOs, you're having very intentional risk conversations which at the end of the day boil down to downtime, which impacts the bottom line. So that's my take.
I'd add to that too, that one of the lessons we've learned is the more nines you want, the more expensive that gets. And so as you start to figure out what your real reliability is, like, can you have a service that's 80% reliable because it's internal? Then the cost of that service starts to become a little easier to manage as well.
Seems like something that, I think most executives would be interested in. And that your answer kind of brings me to another point, which is that reliability isn't just a concern of engineers and engineering executives and IT executives, because software runs our businesses, runs our lives, as we know. How do you see, or how have you seen SLOs impacting different types of executives, whether it be sales, product, or customer success in your organization, Alex?
Yeah, for us, on the lowest level, it has given our customer service organization a place to go, right? So when customers start calling in and they have maybe a bad experience, it at least gives us a place for our customer service reps to go and say what might be read in the SLOs, where might we see a signal. And so yeah, that has been very valuable. And from a product perspective, I will admit very early, I think that if I could do this journey over again, I would have started with product. We definitely came in with a mission to reduce pager fatigue, and we were a small organization. Our engineering org has grown many, many times over when I first joined. And I think originally we were hoping that by showing this new cool tool and another way to measure your service, that it would take hold and it would drive the adoption upward, and that we would get more folks invested. As Alex Hidalgo warned us early on, start with product, but I don't think we were mature enough to wrap our head around that. And so we've had to kind of embrace that afterwards. We now have product involved. We're making product-based SLOs. But I do think for us, there's been a maturity we had to sort of mature in that space with SLOs. And so now having product involved and having them be able to see how their services are being represented by their customers, now you can go and get that feedback directly, and that feedback can go up to executives. And I'll add one more thing to this. From my experience, it's not, I have never sat in front of a customer call and had to explain to them why my site was down. That's usually left to the executives. The VPs are the ones that have to go and apologize to the customers when something is down. And wouldn't you like to know that you're due an apology before you have to go and do that apology? So I think part of that is another reason why execs should be invested. The less thus you have to apologize for your services or get out in front and say, yeah, we had a mistake, we made a mistake. At least be able to go and show, hey, we made a mistake, we saw it, here's our signals. Be in front of that, not behind it.
Great answer there. And so shifting a little bit, I want to talk about something that comes up quite a bit in conversations I have with customers, and that is error budget policies. So basically the so what of service level objectives. What should our organization do if we're violating error budgets repeatedly? You know, so my question really is for both of you, how can error budget policies help executives make decisions? And maybe actually even going a step further, should executives be advocating for error budget policies in the first place, or is that too draconian in your estimation?
Dan, you got an answer? I have a thought.
This is one of my favorite topics, because it's, yeah, like, okay, you violate your error budget, now what? And I think it really depends on the organization, and some observations I've made, right? Like the bigger the enterprise that's trying to scale service level objectives, the more top-down support that I see is necessary. Like, put something in place that makes it very easy for directors across an organization to understand the reliability of the services that they're accountable for, and for them to make reliability really just, hey, we're going to prioritize reliability work decisions on. So I kind of see that as like a error budget policy in a way of, hey, directors, like, we're empowering you with all this reliability data. Now you can make decisions on prioritizing improvements in reliability work. In smaller organizations where maybe the SRE team is much closer to the product, right? Like they're the ones that are, you know, on call for a lot of the things. There tends to be a bit more stake in the SLOs on like that SRE team, for example. But when you have SLOs spread across an organization, more of a kind of standardization approach around this is kind of the expectation around error budget policies, I think it tends to be more successful from what I've seen. But at the end of the day, when we say error budget policy, like, what does that mean? Like some organizations I see go very black and white with that. Like, we're going to stop all of our work and we're going to focus on identifying contributing factors of what's driving down our error budget. And we're going to figure that out. Some just look at it and say, this other thing still takes priority. That's still okay. Like, you made a data-informed decision. But the whole idea is to put these feedback loops and maybe processes in place, reports, right? Monthly decisions, sprint decisions, maybe, to look at the data and make decisions from it, because that's what SLOs give you. That's what they help you do, is they help you drive conversations to make decisions on improving reliability work. And that could mean lowering the target. You know, it could mean fixing a bug. It can mean lots of things. So it's really about empowering the right people to drive prioritization to the right teams. So that's my take.
Yeah, I love Dan's answer. Like, I just love things that start the right conversations. It doesn't mean everything has to be so binary. There is always, you know, some spectrum of whether we can afford to fully invest in the tech debt. But I love the fact that it starts that conversation. Should we be feature focused or not? My heart goes out to feature devs, right? Their job is to continually develop and build the platform that the customers are requesting. And we know how this cycle goes. Sales will often make commits for high integrity commits and say, hey, we need this. feature and we can land this customer. And if that team is also struggling with tech debt, maybe it is more important to land that customer. But by having that SLO, you at least are engaged in that conversation of what the trade-offs are between that feature or that tech debt. And where else would that happen? It would happen with a bunch of monitors firing off, or it would happen with incidents that are being triggered. And neither of those, one can lead to fatigue and one is too late, right? So minimally, the SLO is that medium ground where you can at least have that conversation of, do you want to push this feature out at risk of possibly having an incident? Those are the kinds of conversations I like having with leadership.
Yeah, I mean, that I think, you know, in the ideal world, we're all enlightened like that. I think the reality is that, you know, one of the biggest struggles is actually getting the organization to be thinking that way. So how should executives go about sponsoring SLOs as company-wide initiatives? In other words, if, you know, if you're sitting there and saying, I really see the benefit, but it's kind of hard to get the ship to turn itself. You know, what are some of the tools that you would suggest that they look at?
I would say some of the places that I have worked that have been able to quickly pivot between operations and feature work and get them done fast are when the executives are engaged in both the operations of their company and also the features going out, the sales success of that company. Because you can't have, you can sell all the things you want, but if you can't deliver them reliably or operationally, then what's the point in still selling? So if you want to be able to pivot quickly and motivate teams, then get involved and address those from the top down as an executive. And the reality is, great leaders motivate for great things, and one of the ways I think you can motivate a person is by showing that you care and that you're interested and that you're at least looking. Like, as an executive, you don't have to be the person that solves the problem, but you certainly can send down the question mark from on high, like, why is this red? There's a lot of weight that comes from an executive leader, and if you're not looking at your product with an operational lens at all, then you're missing out on that level, that amount of work that helps stand you up operationally. And so inspire, influence, get involved, dig in. And I think doing that with an SLO is not a waste of time. You will come, like, so another tangent here would be, if I were to come into a new company as an executive, one of the first things I think I would worry about is, how do I learn this space? How do I learn the technologies and all the things that are connected? Well, you'll learn that by getting deep into your SLOs, right? You'll start understanding all of the dependencies and the service calls. And so another place to start so that you have confidence to ask the right operational questions is by getting intimate with your SLOs. And if I were going to invest, there would be two places. Show me your design docs and all your architectural designs. Now go show me all your SLOs and SLIs and explain those to me so I can get a good operational picture of where we are as an executive.
That's a really great point. I don't think it's something that people typically think about, you know, part of the value of SLOs, but it's absolutely true. You get a really good understanding of your infrastructure and how it's operating when you understand what's happening with the SLOs.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, one observation I've made too is, it sounds simple, but executives giving engineering teams space to think about what reliability actually means for their service. Like, I've sat down with hundreds of engineering teams at this point to help them build out, you know, initial SLOs. And every single one of those sessions, the engineering teams thrive on them because they're thinking about their service in a new way. And being able to kind of talk about the gaps in their observability, or, hey, we don't have that metric, like, what the heck does that even mean? How does this tie to this and that? The engineers appreciate that conversation. And when they start actually measuring the reliability of their service, they see their service from a whole new angle. So executives giving their organization space to think about reliability through an SLO framework can really kind of start shifting the culture and, you know, helping engineers actually understand their observability too. Like, there's a lot of engineering teams I've worked with, they're so busy with so many tasks and so many other standards and things that they have to align with and feature work. So just giving them a bit of space to make sure that they have the foundation of, hey, what does reliability mean? Do I have the observability to measure that? And tell the story around around what those targets are and why, it really is always a productive conversation. So that's just one of my observations.
No, that's a great point. Talking a little bit about the implementation side of SLOs, what sort of resource investment, and either you can jump on this, what sort of resource investment does a sort of SLO deployment entail? And how much time and effort does that take? And, if I'm an executive, thinking about, obviously the return on investment, there's an investment portion of this. Like, what does that really look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not free. It's not cheap. There is an investment in doing SLOs right and doing SLOs well. One of the things that we have leaned on a lot is a maturity matrix at Procore, recognizing that when you bring SLOs in from zero, how do you get mature where you are making business decisions based on your SLOs? So I think going in with at least a maturity step function of like, hey, let's just at least, like, one of the things we did early on was we started by siloing our services as opposed to going cross product. Again, I would rather have gone product, but it was maturity steps. So clearly defining maturity steps, but each of those steps is an investment. The real trick is being able to communicate the value of what you're going to get out of that when you do finalize those steps and what that maturity is going to look like. But make no mistake, we've been on this journey as a company for a couple of years, and every iterative step has gotten us better and better about being reliable and being first to know. But I don't want to make any illusion that this is just plug and play. In fact, that's probably one of my biggest complaints right now is that I think there's a big difference between a monitor where you can set a threshold and forget about it, and when it alerts, then you can be remembered. And there is no big iteration unless you get alerted too much. SLOs are not that. You need to be operationally aware, be operationally iterative. You should bake that into your, in my opinion, into a weekly operational review cycle. So there is an investment. It's not something you're going to set up once and then just review and forget about. You have to continually check your signal. Have customers complained and that signal is inaccurate? Well, we need to go and reevaluate that. And you're not going to catch that if you're not asking the hard questions, like, was an incident fired and an SLO didn't catch it? Those are simple questions that should be answered, but they do take investment. They take time, and they take brain power. And so we have been doing operational reviews on my team for a while now, and we have found that even the observability team has gotten a little bit lackadaisical on monitoring our own SLOs. But it's an investment. It's a cycle. It's just like any other operational practice. And it does take time. And I would encourage people to recognize that time. But the investment, the payoff on that is becoming more operationally aware and having those hard discussions about tech debt versus future work. And is this a reliable service? What should its threshold be? Should we set the expectation to 80% available or 99? All of those conversations take time, brain power. It is not fire and forget. It is an investment.
And so I would, to summarize that, it sounds like you're kind of, going by the old proverb. It's not really the destination. You're never really done with SLOs. It's more the journey, and the journey is where you actually get quite a bit of the value.
Yeah, one of my favorite things is decomming an SLO. When you realize, hey, like, this service isn't important anymore, and we don't need this measurement, and we've moved on because it's become either not as much of a dependency or reliability. And so same thing, like, I think decomming stuff is just is forgotten about just as much as bringing them up. So yeah, it takes visibility and investment and awareness. It can't be fire and forget.
So Dan, I'm gonna sort of ask this question to you in a little bit different way. What is the risk for an executive of not doing of not investing in a service level objective program? In other words, business as usual, sit on my hands, do nothing. What is the actual risk there?
Yeah, I would just think about it from, like, asking very simple questions, right? Like, today, how do we know that we're meeting the reliability requirements of our customers? Like, can you answer that? How do you drive prioritization of reliability across an entire organization? How do you communicate about it? how do you know the current health of your services? What do you go to today? You know, is it Slack threads, Teams? Like, is it word of mouth, or do you have a designated place that you trust that tells you what the reliability of your services are? Um, if you ask your engineering organization, do they trust their alerts? Do they? Or are they burnt out? You know, how do you set targets for reliability? Like these are things that I think are very challenging. I think these are questions that are challenging to answer if you don't have SLOs. That's my experience with it. So I think it's really just what's your reliability strategy? Is it a reactive approach? Do you have a proactive approach? How do you look at data historically? How do you make decisions to drive, reliability improvements? So I'll keep it simple.
I'd add to that the risk is that your customers complain to you before you recognize you have a problem.
That's a big one.
At the end of the day, like I don't
Nothing a
want to be the
CEO loves more than hearing
Right.
about it from the customer first, right?
Yeah, nothing worse than one of your biggest customers saying your product is too slow or underperformant for us, and you had no idea. So that's how you get in front of that risk.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I would add, in my experience, I think the most successful SLO programs are both top down and bottom up. So there's
Yeah.
support from the top down in terms of driving those operational processes. And like any other operational pattern, it needs constant review, needs to be driven by executives.
Yeah.
But bottoms up, there's value in it for SRE teams, for feature development teams to invest in these things, and then you can kind of meet in the middle, and I guess you would say like kind of achieve the nirvana of perfect operations. Although I don't know that actually exists either.
Well, on the executive level too, Brian, I'd add that all that is let them know you're paying attention. Like you don't have to invest and get in the SLIs. As an executive, just let others know I'm watching this, I'm invested, I'm paying attention. And that will generally drive the right motivation for those below you. If there's high ownership, right, they will then start to do the right thing. Just once people recognize that executives are paying attention, I generally see the traction and the right work getting done.
And I guess along those lines, do you see service level objectives and error budgets as a mechanism for executives to actually get more involved in incidents? Sort of it kind of gives them a way to ask those questions instead of just like reacting to what they're hearing.
In an ideal world, right? That's what I would love. I would love every executive to be in the retrospective if they had that, especially high severity, right? Every executive should be in there. And if I were to if you can only ask one question as an executive in an incident review, it would be, did an SLO catch this before? And that simple question is extremely valuable. It sets everyone off onto the right work. Like, no, it did not. Okay, well, why not? Yes, it did. Well, great. What could we have done faster? Right. It starts to have the right questions. And yeah, if time were unlimited and execs weren't already slammed, then yes, I would highly encourage you to go attend an incident review, high severity incident review, and ask that simple question about your SLOs as an executive.
That's great. Dan, anything to add there? Or I think Alex did a good job summarizing.
Yeah, I mean, just because you're not getting alerted doesn't mean your services are meeting reliability expectations. I think there's a culture in postmortems that the focus is, did I get alerted? Did I get alerted? But it's like, are you actually measuring the reliability of that thing is a whole new conversation.
It's reliability, not availability. And I think it goes into another webinar topic that we've had in the past. I'd encourage if folks on this one haven't listened to, go find our webinar on MTTR versus SLOs. But I think historically there's been a lot of focus from the executive level on MTTR. And I think that's just because they haven't had a framework that's better, right? It's kind of what was available at the time.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a whole conversation around how distributed computing has outscaled monitoring and how SLOs kind of fill that gap. Yeah, it's been a interesting journey, and I have personally witnessed that what pager fatigue looks like and how SLOs have made that a little bit easier to manage.
Yeah, and Alex, you mentioned the pager fatigue. that's the sort of thing that does lead to employee burnout and churn, which is obviously something that executives want to avoid. It's expensive to have employee churn. You lose a lot of knowledge, and you generally you don't get as much productivity from employees that are burned out. I also I often hear about sort of the hidden costs of being reactive when it comes to outages and reliability. Maybe you can speak a little bit about through an executive lens, what are those costs when they bubble up to this sort of scale of an organization that you work in?
Yeah, hidden costs of not being reliable, right? Is
Yeah,
that
well, I mean, and just more along the lines of, hits to like productivity and employee satisfaction and things like that, right? They're not directly going to hit the bottom line, but they are sort of indirectly hitting the bottom line.
Yeah, that's interesting. So just thinking through our journey of SLOs, one of the challenges that we had early on was that we had systems that weren't owned, like they had been built and then left to sort of stand up on their own at an old point in time at when we hadn't scaled to the size that we are. And so a hidden cost there is that tech debt that went unaddressed, that was possibly having a bad user experience, and not signaled, and no one knew about it until a customer finally complained. And so then suddenly you have to react to that. Right? You have a team that's on a roadmap and they're like, we got to get stuff done. Well, this event bus is failing all the time. So now you've got to take them off of that feature work and address this. And then you find out throughout your organization that that's common in many places. And so the hidden cost of like stopping your feature work because you don't have a great signal across your organization on services that matter, those hidden costs show up in labor, right? They show up in roadmap churn. Hard to been doing
I
this a
think
long time.
you see it, but it's hard to exactly quantify it, right? You're not counting every story point. I would generally not encourage people to count every story point. But you've got that context switching cost as well of I'm going to come off what I've been doing. I'm going to try to come up to speed on this other thing. So yeah, I would guess probably quite a bit of lost productivity there. So, I think a lot of great thoughts and feedback here. If you do have questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat as we start to wrap up a little bit. I'm gonna ask each of Alex and Dan to maybe leave us with just a few final thoughts for folks that are just embarking on the SLO journey and how to do that effectively. Dan, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I think when you start thinking about scaling SLOs, it can be a little overwhelming at first. And perfection can be paralyzing, but you can get a lot of value pretty quickly if you focus on the critical stuff first and you prioritize that work first, and you can show value and get wins. And, you don't have to try to boil the ocean and try to get the perfect SLOs to start. The most success I see with a lot of customers is we meet them where they're at, right? It's like, what wakes you up at 2 a.m.? How do you declare sub ones? Those signals are readily available. It's pretty low friction to stand up SLOs and get that ball rolling pretty quickly. So I think people kind of get overwhelmed about the idea sometimes of starting an SLO program. But you can really get started very quickly, especially if you have a platform and the tooling to do it. And that's another thing that I see people get hung up on, is just making a decision on where to put the SLOs and how to do that. Like, what system do I use? How do I calculate the SLOs? Some of that work too. But just getting started, honestly, you'll find once you get started, you'll start seeing the benefits and what that means to your organization quicker than you would think. That's been my experience. So.
Thanks, Dan. Anything to add there, Alex?
Yeah, from an executive perspective, I would just say that the sooner you get involved with that, and also you bring product along for that journey. Like if I had a magic wand to reset, I would have done that sooner, is try to get more executive buy-in and more product buy-in early on, because product owners should be able to see how their customers are being impacted by the product that they represent. And again, you just don't want to be the one that goes into one of those customer meetings and being surprised by someone saying the product is not meeting their needs or their expectations. And I echo Dan's sentiment that it doesn't have, like, that perfectionism problem. Certainly I've seen that at Procore, where everyone worries about getting the perfect signal. If you have a healthy retrospective on your incidents and that question is asked, did your SLO catch this? That will start to drive some of that right investigation. Don't worry about perfect, get started, but get intimate enough that when you see that your signals are wrong, you know where to go and make those changes for that signal. And not having an SLO means you got to start that from scratch. So maybe you're looking at your latency as your signal and you recognize that latency isn't important, response time is, or whatever. The fact that you had latency, got it wrong, and now you're going to switch to response time is great. It should be an easier change. So I agree with Dan. Start the journey. Don't get afraid. We can all do hard things, but the end result is it is operational maturity and a really good visibility.
That's a great point. So, just before we go, if folks want to learn more about Procore, where can they find out more? Maybe jobs at Procore, things like that.
Yep, Procore.com. And I think it's careers.procore.com. Yeah, come join us. We have a lot of fun over there.
Great, thank you so much. And if you're interested, obviously, in getting some help from Nobl9 on your SLO journey, reach out to us. Easiest way to do that is nobl9.com, nobl9.com, and fill out a request a demo form, and we will be in touch with you. Oh, it looks like we had one question show up. How has AI transformed the way Nobl9 approaches SLOs, and how is it driving business value? I did not plant that question. I will say from where I sit, it's still TBD. How AI transforms how we approach SLOs. I know there's a lot of research going on. One thing I can definitely say is that AI has improved how I evangelize about SLOs. Makes it a lot easier to distill the concepts for different audiences, just using ChatGPT to help figure out how to talk about these concepts. And I think more directly, it actually is a pretty good venue for analyzing things like which services are appropriate for putting SLOs onto. I don't know, Dan, Alex, any thoughts about AI and SLOs?
Not yet. I have seen AI be very useful during incidents when it's in the channel and doing summarizations of that incident, or even having the ability to go out and find graphs and charts for you for different platforms. But how that relates to SLOs yet, we haven't been able to use it in that manner.
Stay tuned, I would say. Yeah.
Stay tuned. Yep.
Good question, though. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Urza, anything else before we wrap it up?
Yes. So thank you, gentlemen. That was an amazing webinar. I really enjoyed it. And to everyone else, thank you so much for joining us today. We truly appreciate your time and engagement. A recording of today's webinar will be sent to you very shortly, so keep an eye on your inbox. And if you enjoyed this session, be sure to follow Nobl9 on social media to stay updated on our latest insights and upcoming events. Speaking of which, our next webinar, Product Management in Fast Growth Tech Companies, featuring Natalia Sikoria Zimna, is happening on the 17th of this month. The registration link is on the chat right now, so be sure to check it out and register. And once again, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, depending on where you're joining from. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.
And thank you again to Alex for joining us today.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.